My name is Todd. We're going to get started right now. I suspect more people will be trickling in due to the lunch hour, but I usually like to save a lot of time towards the end because this is definitely a discussion-oriented session. So I'm going to, in some places, kind of race through a couple of things to make sure we have plenty of time to talk, because I do very much want this to be a dialogue. So, welcome to Why RFPs Are Bad For Business and How We Can Stop Them. Howdy. Section 1, Introductory Material, Who I Am. Section 1.1a, Key Personnel. Todd Nienkerk, Digital Strategist and Partner for Kitchens. You can follow me there on Twitter. I will warn you in advance, it's all just a bunch of bad puns. So let's talk about who you are. Section 1.1b, Stakeholder Interviews. What I would like to know, how many people here consider themselves to be vendors? You provide services or products. Fantastic. How many of you are clients? You typically hire vendors for services and products. Now keep your hands raised. All vendors, look at one of these people and introduce yourself. Please do it.
Hi.
That's good enough. Thanks, Nate. Participation points. Who here works in the public sector? All right. How many people here have responded to an RFP, didn't win it, and never found out why? Frustrating, huh? What do you think of when you think of an RFP? Free word association, go. Underspecified. Overspecified. Waste of time. Thunderdome. Let's end on that. That's a good one. Thank you. I wanted you to introduce yourselves to each other because what I want to talk about is how when we work together, clients and vendors, vendors and clients, we are establishing a relationship. And it's about knowing the people involved because these are the people you're going to be working with for weeks, months, years. You don't want to get to know them just as a report, as one of 36 or 300 or 3 proposals that were delivered to you. You want to know the people. Let's talk about why we're here. Section 1.2 Vision Statement. I believe that the RFP process is broken. I believe that it takes too much time. I believe that it stifles vendors' creativity. And I believe that it forces clients to commit with little opportunity to really know those vendors. But like any other powerful tool, it can really benefit your company and organization when it's wielded correctly. So I don't want to blanketly say that RFPs are terrible and nobody should do them, but I want to say that the process is broken. Everybody likes horror stories, so let's get those out of the way. What are our qualifications and previous experiences? Feel free always to tweet your horror stories to RFP Horror. Of course, any horror story of any quality is less than 140 characters. So I'm going to tell you a couple. 3 years ago, we got on the phone with a very large Northeastern Ivy League university. And they had issued an RFP a couple of weeks before, and they were doing interviews with potential vendors. One person arrived on the phone call. A couple moments later, the other person arrived on the phone call. And then they said, oh, hey, nice to meet you. Oh, how are you doing? Where do you work? Oh, I'm in this department. Oh, that's interesting. So here we have the 2 clients meeting each other for the first time on the phone call where they're interviewing vendors. They then proceeded to argue about the scope of the project for the RFP they had already issued. This went on for an hour. We were very polite. We thanked them for their time. And we ended that lead entirely because they had never met, they had never talked to each other in person, let alone on the phone or anything, and they didn't know what they wanted, and yet they were expecting us and every other vendor that would reply to somehow read their minds. Second story, very recently, 3 days ago, I know that the University of Minnesota just issued an RFP. This is not that RFP, but it's another major state university system that issued an RFP. It is the worst kind of RFP. It is the, we need you to print out 6 copies, one of which is marked original, 5 of which marked copies, put them in 3-ring binders, separate them with labeled sections. Also deliver 4 burned CDs with protective covers. Can't email them, but we can ship all of this to them in a box. In some cases, they have to be delivered via a reputable international carrier or in person. I'm sure we've all run across things like that in the past, right? Now, we'll talk about why that is. It's not their fault. They're not being silly. They're doing this because they have to. And they are stifled by a process that has been created for them, but not by them. I want to lay the groundwork about why RFPs exist to begin with, so that we have a common understanding and we're not just complaining about them all the time. There are good reasons. And the first good reason is that there is work to be done and a client needs vendors to help them do that work. Makes sense, right? This is why everybody thinks they're doing RFPs, and sometimes this really is why they're doing RFPs. The clients realize they're not experts at everything, or they don't have the bandwidth, and they want to bring in people who can help them. Makes sense. Sometimes there are rules and regulations. So if you're at a large corporation, or if you're at a nonprofit, or if you're in a government system or public university, there are rules and regulations that say you have to go through procurement or sourcing, and they have these steps that they must follow for bids of X size. There are also reasons for regulatory compliance. If you're a publicly traded company, things like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act comes into play. Sometimes in healthcare industries, there are very specific accounting practices that have to be accounted for. So we do know that under the good reasons column, there are things that just can't be avoided. Sometimes this is written into state law, and I'm going to talk about some of the states that have some very unusual laws later on. Many organizations, if a project exceeds a certain expected cost, they are required to gather competitive bids. Sometimes everybody requires competitive bids. You must get at least 3 reasonably promising bids in order to move forward with the project at all, even if you have a vendor already in mind. I have found, and the people that I have paneled with on this subject before, we have sort of collectively found that in many cases, the vendor has already been chosen. And now this organization or possible client is looking for proposal fodder. They simply need to round out the other 2 or 4 or however many vendors they need to submit a proposal. Otherwise, they can't move forward at all. They know who they're going to go with, and they're going to write that RFP so that only that one organization can win the project. There are sometimes bad reasons. That's how we've always done it. Why'd you do this? We've always done it. I've been here 10 years. This is just how we've always done it. Not a particularly good reason to make everybody jump through these hoops and then have to sit down and read everybody's 60 or 100-page responses. And how many are you going to get as a client? 5? 20? And then how many hours does that take of your time, let alone the time each of those vendors spent putting that proposal together? I think I'm supposed to write an RFP. My favorite story is we got a really weird-looking RFP once, and we thought, this just doesn't seem like them. So we asked them, where did you get this RFP? And they said, well, I Googled, how do I get vendors? And somebody said an RFP. So then I Googled, how do I write an RFP? And I found some website with a bunch of business documents in it, and it gave me this template. And that's where all that weird wording came from, because it just didn't feel like their organization. It felt like somebody was filling out a form that was kind of in a different language. Sometimes that happens. I do want to say, though, that on the vendor side, sometimes we make the mistake on our contact forms of saying, send us your RFP. Don't ask for an RFP. Ask to talk to the client, right? So we are actually reinforcing this behavior by telling clients we expect RFPs. Now there are the evil reasons. These have some malice associated with them. The bad reasons, maybe out of ignorance, maybe out of habit. Pricing a project to gain leverage over an existing vendor. Here's how this works. Let's say you as a client have been working with a vendor for the past 2 or 3 years, and things have been going great, and you do lots of repeat work. Every 6 months or 3 months, there's some little project that comes along, or big project, and you keep going back to them because they do good work and you're happy. But at some point, somebody's going to say, I wonder if we're actually getting a good deal here, or they just kind of like, they hopped on the train and they keep going, right? So somebody says, you know, that next project, put it out to bid. They put it out to bid, they get some responses. And we all know that anytime you put out a bid, especially an open bid, meaning you haven't pre-qualified vendors, you just say, here's a bid, and it goes out to all these websites, and potentially hundreds of organizations see it, and maybe 100 respond. You're going to get some really weird responses. You're going to get really low bids, and you're going to get really high bids. Generally, you kind of want to ignore those 2 extremes, because chances are they don't fully understand what it is you're trying to do. Now, you can go back to them and explain what you're trying to do, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit later. But the point is, as an organization, you receive this wide swath of bids, and they focus in on the cheapest. And then they go back to their existing vendor and say, hey, that thing that you said was going to cost $100,000, well, these people think they can do it for 20. What do you think of that? And then you, as the existing vendor, are put in this weird spot where you then have to say, well, but what were they responding to? And they don't know you, and they don't know what it's like to work with your organization. They don't understand your capabilities, and we're giving you a fair price. I mean, we're only billing the work that we're doing here, but still you feel that pressure. There's that leverage that they now have over you about price, and you're going to feel compelled to come down a little bit, whether that means lowering your rate or offering a discount or something. Organizations do this on occasion. There's the free consulting aspect. I've heard many stories where people will spend 100 hours on a proposal because the RFP said, be specific. Tell us exactly how you are going to implement these things. Tell us what Drupal modules you're going to use. What base theme will you use? Are you going to use SaaS? Stuff like that. So you put together this big vision for free because that's what the client has asked for. Be specific. They take it in-house. They get some other ideas about how to implement things, and then they say, thanks, everybody. We're going to have our IT team do it. But we appreciate all of your time. We truly do. They're taking your free work, and they're implementing the blueprint that you have created. This does happen. There's risk aversion. This is a little subtle. Let's say you're at an organization, and your boss or somebody tells you, we need to redo our website. And you've never built a website before. You have no idea. This was kicked down to you for whatever reason. And you're a little nervous because you don't really feel like you're the right person to be selecting a vendor, or you're not really all that qualified to be talking about what websites should and should not do, because that's why you want to hire a vendor, right? So in cases like these, when people don't really understand what it is that they're asking for, it is possible that clients could start to run all of these vendors through various very rigorous ringers, interview processes with multiple steps, or wanting to see financial statements from previous years, or signing all kinds of documents saying, well, we've all seen the really bad stuff, right? So these people are displacing the responsibility of this selection to the vendor. And if something goes sideways, they can say, I did everything I could. I checked every box. I dotted every I. I crossed every T. I looked at their financials. I did all this stuff. There's no way it's my fault. When in fact, maybe that person should not have been given the responsibility of finding a vendor and owning the project on the client side to begin with. Maybe it is actually their fault. But sometimes these RFP processes are put in place because that person is maybe a little scared. And that's okay. But sometimes this happens. Sometimes organizations want to qualify new vendors. This is the equivalent of putting up a job posting, gathering a bunch of resumes, and saying, thanks, we're going to keep them on file. And there wasn't necessarily even a job post that was open. This is the vendor-client equivalent of that. So in doing something that is good, pre-qualifying vendors, the process that is sometimes followed is bad, which is disingenuously saying there's a project and we want you to bid on it, and then everybody spends all this time putting together a proposal. And then they get this information, and the organization now understands, okay, this shop seems expensive, and this shop seems cheap, and they seem to specialize in this, and they seem to specialize in that, and we're going to keep this on record next time we have a project. Now, pre-qualifying vendors is an excellent idea. Everybody should do that, but don't do it that way. Pre-qualify them by talking to them. Just have a phone call. Every vendor wants to talk about themselves for as long as you will allow them to. So just give them that opportunity. Have a 1-hour phone call, or meet over coffee, or do something. Don't fake that you have work just to gather proposals and try and learn about their organization that way. So why should we respond? It is possible for a really exceptional team to break into the big leagues through the RFP process. It is possible for the traditional RFP process to level the playing field a bit so that everybody has more of an equal chance, so that a 3-person shop working out of their garage can go up against Accenture and maybe win this project. There is something to be said about that, for sure. It's the underdog story, right? So if there's no established client-vendor relationship, it is difficult but possible to break through to show these clients what you're really made of. The Cinderella story kind of thing. So your company, especially if you're very small, you're rapidly evolving, and these big league clients are too, and sometimes they want to find smaller shops because you can work more agilely. You're more in touch with the technologies, you're trying new things, you're hungry, you're exciting. Sometimes the RFP process can allow you to make more of an impression. The Accenture is another big, I don't mean to just pick on them, but pick your favorite large consulting firm. They have million-dollar advertising and marketing budgets. They can send anybody at a moment's notice to go talk to a client, right? So it feels very challenging to go up against them, but it is possible sometimes. If you do respond, you want to practice Safe RFP. What we mean by that is understand the complexity and the size of the project. Is it appropriate? So if a client just wants a blog, how complicated is their RFP? Are they saying, we just want a blog, just don't worry, just a blog. You know what a blog is. We want a blog. If it's a very complicated RFP, then there's some kind of weird complexity going on there, or they don't really know what that means, or they don't really know what they want. So watch out for things like that. Try to have a prior relationship. Try to have an internal advocate with the client. You'll gain a lot of insight. Most importantly, if you can't afford to lose the project, you may not be able to afford to win it. What I mean by that is, fist pump in the back, thank you. What I mean by that is, if you're spending weeks and weeks and weeks on this RFP and you're on the proposal rather, and you're not scheduling your resources in anticipation of getting this, or if you realize like, oh, this is turning into we're a 5-person shop and this is a $2 million budget, that project will kill you. You may win it and you'll feel great about it, but the bigger a company is and the bigger budget they have, the slower they will pay. What is the worst net payment terms anybody here has ever seen? I've seen net 75. Anything worse? Wow. 120? I've heard of 120, but I've never seen it with mine own eyes. Oof. So, what that means is, for people who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, let's say you do work on January 1st. Most people bill monthly, right? So you're billing that work on February 1st. Now you have your net payment terms. Net means by the day that you receive it, you have X number of days. 30 net, 30 days. 60 net, 60 days to pay that invoice from the client side. So if you have net 30 terms, the client must pay by, let's say, March 1st, just to make the dates clean. They must pay by March 1st. So it's taking you 2 months to get paid for work that you did on January 1st. Now, if you have net 120 terms, you do work on January 1st, you issue an invoice February 1st. You then see March, April, May, June 1st. Effectively 6 months later. Let's say you have a $2 million project. How are you paying, and your whole team has to hop on it, how are you paying those people during those 6 months? Line of credit? So your money's not coming in. Your cash flow has been interrupted. Be very careful about this. This can actually destroy your company.
And that assumes that the client will actually then hit 120 and say, oh, well, let's just write off a big check then.
Which never happens, because if they're 120, it'll be more like 150. And you got to bug them about it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's why I said 300.
Yep. Yep.
That's a 120 with an extra 4 or 5 months for them to actually say, yeah, that's right. We got it and we like it.
Yep. Yep. Then, of course, there are things like acceptance terms and all that, and that just complicates it more. Point is cash flow. It could sink you. So,
plus you're still working February, March, April, May, and you're still billing, you're still not getting paid.
that's right. So, I contend maybe you should not respond to RFPs. So I'm going to break down what we do at 4 Kitchens here. We spend 40 to 80 hours per RFP, on average. Sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's 200 hours responding to an RFP. That's an opportunity cost for us of about $7,000 to $14,000. That's how much we could be billing if we weren't spending writing this proposal. There are additional hard costs that we incur, legal fees, travel expenses to go to the bid. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have people that handle marketing and client relations. Sometimes they want to see these proposals before they go out the door, make sure that they're all on message and that we're using all the correct terminology and our boilerplate is good and all of that. So now we have another person that we're paying to read all of our proposals before they go out the door. Not just the people who could be building websites otherwise, right? So now we have additional staff that have to review these things. We have found, one day, these data are maybe about a year old, but we listed every client we ever tried to get one day. And we found that of all of the RFP-driven relationships, we only won 22%. So that is a hit rate of 22%, about a fifth. So out of every 5 proposals we write, we get 1. However, only 16% of all of the work that we do results from RFPs at all. That means 84% of the work that we do involved no RFPs. Word of mouth, personal relationships, things like that. So the conclusions we reached were that RFPs had driven a small but not entirely insignificant amount of our business, 16%. We also discovered it costs us far less to send a team to meet that potential client than to respond to that RFP. It's $1,000, $2,000 to send 2 people for a day to go visit a client, as opposed to $7,000 to $14,000 responding to their proposal. Now, every client still wants an estimate for what you do. You're still going to have to put that work into it. But don't think that it's the only way to respond, that it's the only way to get to know a client. Sometimes it's actually cheaper to send people there. There's also this collateral damage. So the word has gotten out, and we first started talking about this about 2 years ago, that we don't respond to RFPs. And we have heard of at least one client within the first month of us talking about this. We didn't even have a slide deck up. I don't know how they heard about it. That at least one client didn't send us anything because they thought we would just never respond. This morning, we got a lead coming in saying, hey, we're major university system, different one. We know you guys don't respond to RFPs, but we hope you'll make an exception in our case. So you have to be very careful when you stand here and say the things I'm saying, because people might not send this stuff to you at all. Just please be careful. So let's just clear the air. We do respond to RFPs because we have to. We don't like to. And we want to come up with better ways for both you, clients, and you, vendors, to get to know one another and have a better relationship, one that's not based on a report that you wrote in the middle of the night. So you can try this yourself at home very quickly. Calculate your hit rate. List all the RFPs you've ever replied to and mark those you've won, right? That's your hit rate. Calculate how reliant you are on RFPs. How many projects that you've received actually went through an RFP proposal process. Calculate your cost of responding. This is very simple. Time spent writing, communicating with client, all of that, blended rate, that's your opportunity cost. Then you have your hard expenses, travel. Sometimes you have to have legal review. This is one of my favorite things. When you submit the RFP, especially for federal institutions, there is a clause that says by submitting a proposal, by submitting a response, you are agreeing to the terms of our contract in advance. Oh, well, where's your contract? You have to ask for it. And then they'll send it to you, and then you have to review it, right? And in that contract, invariably, there will be things like the following state regulations apply, and there are 50 state regulations just listed out by like state, whatever the legal code thing is called, with the double S and all the numbers and the letters, and you have to go look them up, or you have to hire an attorney in California to try and figure out what all that stuff means, right? Hard costs, that's your total cost of responding. Now you want to weigh that against the project's revenue. Will you actually make money? If you're having somebody lose $14,000 in opportunity cost, and the scope of this project is $10,000, why would you respond to it? Now there are good reasons, and I'll get to those in a moment. So think about the revenue, what the margin is, how much you're going to spend just to get the business. You want to think about the likelihood. How likely are you to actually win this? Reasons to take the project. Are you actually a perfect match for the client? Is this a client you've always wanted to work for? Is this a big name client? Is this something that's going to allow you to experiment with new technologies? Or is this client going to allow you to grow in new and interesting ways? Can you hire people because of this client? Are you trying to establish yourself in a brand new space? Is this a healthcare client you've always wanted to get into healthcare and this is how you get your foot in the door? Yeah, maybe you're willing to take a loss or a significant decrease in your profit on that project. Lots of good reasons to take projects even if it's not going to be that profitable. So here are some alternatives. I'm going to, big shout out here to Zach Chandler. He is a web strategist at the university, at Stanford University. He does something very different. He has completely revolutionized how Stanford University, how many people here have worked with Zach? I think there are a fair amount. Okay, yeah, all right. Great guy. He has totally revolutionized how Stanford handles their vendor selection process. He has, in any project that he's involved in, he has eliminated the RFP. He starts with a conversation. He does not start with a document. And the conversation happens on the client side first, and then it's on the vendor side. He gathers business requirements for the project, who the audiences are. He does a little mini discovery. He does a 2-hour discovery session with whoever it is, the library or the law school or whoever it is that he's working with. He then writes out an expository sketch, not an RFP, and not a list of business requirements. The expository sketch is a 2 to 5 page document that says, in plain English, written in paragraphs, we are the university library system. We want a website that does some really cool stuff with online learning. And here are some ideas that we have. here's how we might implement it, but this is just our off-the-cuff, back-of-the-envelope kind of sketch. You're the experts. You tell us how you would want to do it, but this is maybe one way that we have thought of implementing this thing, to give you an idea of the scope of what we want to do. Let us know, in a week if you're interested, and then if you are, let's set up some time to talk. That's it. That's what the document says, right? It's just like, does this sound cool, and do we have time to do it? And as a vendor, that's all you need to think about at that point. There are then some presentations. So who are you as a vendor? And you get to know, each side gets to know the other through video or in person. Then you're going to have a lot of questions, right? Everybody has questions about the scope of the project. You've now read their expository sketch. You've talked to them one-on-one. You go back to your offices and you think about like, oh, I wonder what they meant by that. Or have they thought about using this technology? So he has a consolidated Q&A phase where he has all vendors submit questions about the project. The client answers them. And then all vendors receive the answers to all of the questions that everybody submitted. But it's a little bit of a, you got to put something in to get something out. If you don't submit any questions, you don't get all the questions that everybody else submitted, right? So now everybody has exactly the same information. And you learn a lot because other vendors, and you're anonymized, but all other vendors have had really interesting questions that you wish you had thought of. Finally, there are proposals. Now the proposals usually just take the form of, we can probably get it done by this date, and we think it's going to cost this much, and here's who's likely to be working on it, and vaguely we think we're going to implement it using the following tools. That's the proposal. He then has a really excellent grading rubric that you can get from him if you ask, where he then reviews these proposals, all of them. He's pre-qualified people, so there are really only maybe 3 or 4 or 5 responses, sits down with the client, and they grade all of the responses according to all kinds of criteria, like applicability of technical solution and how well did they capture the vision of the project. When we met them in person or on video, did we like them? What was the intangible feel? Did they seem like they were fun? Did it seem like we want to work with them? So he's trying to capture all the intangibles. Bottom line, he's engaging all of the vendors in a collaborative phase. He's pre-qualified, he's sent out minimal amounts of paperwork, and it's a lot of conversation from that point forward. It's really, truly ideal. Another approach. When you are working with a client, a lot of what you're doing is negotiation. You're negotiating the legal document. You're negotiating the cost and the time frame and the scope and things like that. The process itself can be negotiated. So talk to the client about, it sounds like you could really use a discovery phase. It sounds like you could have somebody come in and do a technical architecture document or a creative architecture document, or to lead you through a facilitated 3-day workshop where we deliver a project plan that clearly outlines what you're trying to do, what your goals are, who you're trying to serve, when you need it done. In other words, there are ways that you as vendors can get paid to do a lot of the work of writing a proposal. And clients, this is where you can get really good feedback and a really accurate and thorough document from which you can build a new RFP. You can also split out the work so that you have a discovery phase and then you have an implementation phase. So you're not trying to bid out the entire thing. After the discovery phase, as we all know, everybody's going to learn a lot about the project. You're going to realize, oh, that thing that we wanted to do is actually, according to computer science, impossible. So let's not make that a requirement. So you eliminate that. Or, hey, we realize that there are a bunch of stakeholders that we didn't include. It turns out that these 40 people are going to need to be using the website. We're going to need to factor them in, and that's a whole other set of functionality and a bunch of overhead. So separate the things out so that you better understand your project cost overall, plus you break it into pieces that are easier for both parties to chew. So here are some advice to clients. I'm going to give 10 tips to clients and 10 tips to vendors, and these are intended to be very concrete and very tactical. Clients, don't default to RFP. Is there something else that you can do? So before you start, ask yourself, is it really necessary to issue an RFP? Or do you actually have more say in your own selection process? There are all kinds of RFPs. There are things like RFIs, requests for information. An RFI is a good way to pre-qualify a vendor. All an RFI says is, send us your boilerplate that tells us about yourself. Then the client can then read that document and realize, oh, of the 40 people that were maybe going to respond to this, only 10 actually do what we need. So now you've eliminated 30 entire proposals that you have to read, right? You can at least focus on those 10. Honesty is the best policy, so always be open and honest with potential vendors as much as possible. Oftentimes this is not entirely possible because of certain communication regulations at wherever you work. But if you can, communicate the budget, communicate the timeline, and communicate the details of your selection process. A lot of people worry about the mentioning the budget thing. Oh, I should never tell anybody the budget because if I tell them the budget, they're going to say that's how much that costs. No. In fact, what they will probably do is say you don't have nearly enough money to do what you want to do. And we know you can't get more, so we know that that's not something that we can try and talk about. Let's say what you can get for that amount of money now before you interview a bunch of people and read a bunch of proposals and then inevitably be disappointed in whatever it is you get a year from now. Please tell vendors how much money you have to spend. If they then report back and say, magically it's going to cost exactly that, well, then maybe they're not the right vendor for you. Maybe there's something weird going on there, right? Don't ask for spec work. This is that blueprint thing, right? Ask for examples of previous work instead. Spec work means we're going to make a website. We want to see 3 designs from every vendor, and we're going to pick the best one, and they get the project. Vendors don't want to do that. That's a waste of their time. It's very unlikely that they're going to get that work just because of the numbers. And also, it's just not the honest thing to do. So please don't do that. Ask for examples of previous work to see if they align with the aesthetic or the kind of functionality or the general philosophy that you're looking for. Always research and pre-qualify your vendors. When you go into a job interview, you should know something about the job you're applying for, right? A good job interview will include the question, why do you want to work here? So you should have an answer to that question. You should say, oh, because I really like the kinds of clients you're working with. I see that you're doing a lot of work with nonprofits, and that's really compelling to me. I'd like to make a difference in the world. But if you were to then answer this question with, I'm looking for a different job, and I saw you on Craigslist. That's not very inspiring. You don't want to hire that person. They don't know who you are. You know, you're now investing an hour of your time in them, and they haven't even looked at your website, right? When you are looking for vendors, please do the same thing. Limit it to some number that you can handle, and make sure you understand something about all of them. Here's an open bid horror story. So I've had the good fortune of doing a panel version of this with some people from HappyCog, and their horror story is they received kind of a funky RFP, and they weren't quite sure what to do with it, so they asked the client, how many people received this RFP? 364. Maybe what, even if a half of them respond, maybe if 25%, that's 90, 80, 150 proposals that a company is not going to read? Come on. Research pre-qualify vendors. It's less work for you if you do it this way. Invest 15 minutes in learning about a company by going to their website. Save yourself 3 hours of reading their proposal. As a client, make sure you're talking to the team, not just the salespeople. Insist on talking to the people who will actually be doing the work, because those are the people you are going to be working with. Salespeople at some vendor organizations might just say about anything to get that work. So try to penetrate that, right? The salespeople and the sales team should be facilitating the process. They should not be the mouthpiece for the vendor. Insist on talking to the people who are going to be doing the work. Relationships really matter, so make it easy for vendors to have a relationship with you. Please don't assume that vendors are out to just take your money. Vendors want to do good. There is so much web work in the world. Vendors are looking for very specific kinds of work that they get a lot of value out of actually doing. I think that this problem comes up a lot when somebody is new to the process on the client side and they're handed this task of having to hire a vendor to make a website. A lot of people, when they deal with consultants, are only familiar with hourly billing when it comes to an attorney they've hired to help write their will or an auto mechanic. Neither of those groups of people are really all that favored in our culture in terms of being very reputable, honest types, unfortunately. So if that's the only kind of experience that the average person has with hourly work, they're going to look at a consultant and say, how much do you bill? And clearly you're going to tell me some number and it's going to come back and be twice as much, right? They're going to have that personal experience and they're going to lay that over the professional experience, unfortunately. So please don't assume that that's the case. Please don't assume that we are like auto mechanics. Cultural fits are really, really important. Make sure that you actually get along and that you have something in common. You're going to be working together for a long, long time. Make sure that you engage your stakeholders. The stakeholders are the people that you are responding to that have to be made happy. So make sure that they are involved very early and that they are involved often. They should probably be involved in the vendor selection process. They need to be involved in telling you what they need so that you can go out and find it for them. The RFP, in other words, like this university that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, should not be the first place where people meet and capture their ideas. Please do not bite off more than you can chew. So earlier, as people were filtering in, we were talking about this idea of splitting up engagements. You can structure your contracts in small bites rather than a single massive RFP. You can then write in a clause that says, and this works in most states as far as I know, if the vendor is performing, they win the next phase automatically. If they are not performing, the client can say that's it, goodbye, and it goes back to bid. If you're in an organization that has a $50,000 cap for budgets, and if it's above $50,000, it has to go out to competitive bid, you can try to find a way to structure your work such that every piece fits under $50,000 and that you link them up in a chain so that they automatically move along the same vendor until such time as you are no longer happy and you can cut it off and find a new vendor to pick up the work. And vendors, sometimes you can suggest this because oftentimes clients don't know you can do this. This is the dating and then moving in together before you get married kind of approach.
That really comes from a vendor point of view. As a client, we would never, coming from both sides, I love it as a vendor, and I would never do it as a client. Because the truth is, when it comes to the web design world, 50% of small design firms never finish 50% of the project. And the ones they do, because they don't understand everything it took to do the project in the first place. That doesn't apply to the larger firms or the larger projects.
There is additional overhead that's introduced when you switch vendors, but I do want to point out that this piece of advice did specifically come from the director of IT at the University of Texas at Austin. So this is something that they very much do.
Yeah, people with where they don't care about their budgets as much. Your typical client has a budget that needs to stay inside of. They don't get a tax dollar, and when a project doesn't get finished, they can't go, oh well, a project didn't get finished. I need to choose a new vendor and start all over again and pay the previous vendor.
I'm not quite following you there. Let's talk after because I'm not quite following this. Because UT has a very small budget cap, and this is something that they do often when they're trying to split up work because their RFP process can be very difficult. Let's talk after. You also want to make sure that you make this a conversation, so allow for open discussions and Q&A whenever possible. This is especially important in the public sector, but understand what your cone of silence is. So in some states, it is actually written into state law, and therefore it is a crime if you engage with the vendor in any way after the RFP is issued. Massachusetts is this way, for example. So if you're in the public sector and you're talking to potential vendors and then you issue the RFP, the cone of silence comes down and you can't talk to the vendor and the vendor can't talk to you. The only way you can communicate with those people is through sourcing or procurement as an intermediary. So you submit questions, they get molded, handed to somebody else, they get answered, and they get molded again and sent back to you, and the whole process usually takes a couple of weeks. And by then, the proposal is due. Also know your contracting options. So this is especially relevant in the public sector. Every state has some kind of, or university systems especially, have some kind of a master service agreement vehicle, like a preferred vendor list. Or in Texas, we have something called the Deliverables-Based IT Services, DBITS, and ITSIC. And in Massachusetts, there's something else. In California, there's something called CMAS, California Multiple Award Schedules. So know what your states allow you to do so that you can work within them. There may be ways that you can speed along the contracting process and not necessarily have to say every new project is a brand new thing. We're going to issue an RFP and people are going to respond to it. So you can find vendor lists and you can help vendors get onto vendor lists. Advice to vendors. Offer alternatives to the process. I mentioned earlier that the process itself is often negotiable. Suggesting the RFI instead of the RFP. Offer to write an evaluation or engage in a facilitated discovery workshop instead of writing the proposal right away. That's going to give both parties a much clearer perspective on what it is they're asking for. If they don't define evaluation criteria, suggest some for them. Find out how they know you. Ask things like, hey, how'd you hear about us? I hope they have an answer to that question. If they say, I went to Drupal.org and I emailed all of the companies under Drupal service providers, all 300 and something of them, it's maybe not a good sign. Ask why you, in particular, were invited to respond. These kinds of questions can be very revealing. And if you've never, ever met with a client and you've never heard of them before and they're being kind of cagey and they're not really responding to your questions at all, you may want to consider that you are, in fact, proposal fodder. And they just want you to submit a proposal because they need to fulfill some requirement. Also get to know your competition. Understand how many other vendors were invited to bid. It's usually unlikely that you'll know who those vendors are. That's also helpful to know if you can get that information, but know how many other vendors were invited to bid. Is it 5 or is it 364? Are there vendors with existing relationships under consideration? That's an interesting piece of information to have in your back pocket. Did another vendor write the RFP? Also an interesting thing to know. This happens a lot. However, oftentimes there are things called preclusion clauses in agreements, especially in the public sector, where people who help write the RFP or help do discovery or something like that are actually precluded from then responding to the RFP that they helped write in some way, shape, or form. So that might not necessarily be a deal killer. It may, in fact, say, oh, if company X wrote the RFP, we're not competing against them. They only wrote the RFP, and we stand as much a chance as anybody else. Know the players on the client side. Find out who the stakeholders and the decision makers are. Sometimes those are different people. It is worth noting that at some organizations, a procurement department's KPI, key performance indicator, meaning at their quarterly or annual review, how well they're doing their job, right, the number they look at, is how much money they saved the organization. In other words, how much were they able to negotiate contracts down within a year? I was able to negotiate $1 million down this year. Oh, you get whatever kind of bonus. If the decision makers are in procurement, try to understand how they are making these decisions. Find an internal advocate. If it's a brand new client, you start asking questions like, hey, how'd you find out about us? Oh, I saw that you sponsored whatever Drupal event. Oh, were you there? What were you doing there? Have that conversation, get to know somebody. Find something in common, they can become your advocate. They're going to give you information into what's happening at the organization. They're going to help you navigate the politics. They're going to help you understand the history of the project. You may find out that, oh yeah, this project, we've been trying to find a person to do this for years. They put this thing out to bid every 6 months, and we've yet to find anybody. Like, okay, something is really broken with their process, right? That's good information to have. I don't entirely mean this, but a flag that I would raise is if somebody has never embarked on a project like this before ever, if they've never worked on a web project and they're evaluating people to help them build their website, they have no idea how much this costs. They're going to look at these numbers and think that they're all crazy. They're not going to understand, they're not going to have the scars of scope creep and all of these things that we deal with as vendors. They don't know how this works. And they're going to be nervous. And they're going to be very literal in everything that you say to them, and all of the when you're doing requirements gathering, you know, they won't know that sometimes, oh, there's these other offices that you absolutely have to talk to, and then you have this phenomenon called the voice in the shadows, and we've all been there. A project's about to launch, and then suddenly somebody steps forward and says, oh, is that thing about to launch? I've been waiting to see this forever. And then they take a look at it, and boy, do they have feedback. And you've never heard of this person before, ever. Now, somebody who had worked within this organization for a while and had done projects would know, that person's probably going to jump out of the shadows at some point. That's a stakeholder that we're going to need to engage early on because they're going to have opinions about this project, and we need to make sure that they are involved throughout. You'll want to scout and prepare. This is the vendor side of pre-qualify vendors. You're going to want to pre-qualify your clients. So clients respond to enthusiasm. They want to hire somebody who understands their business and is on board with their mission, and you want to make sure that you match. So understand their mission, understand what they're doing, understand what they've done, scout, prepare, come to the table having understood what they've done in the past. Consider the cost of bidding. This is same thing as I said earlier. If you can't afford to lose the project, you probably can't afford to win it. Pay attention to absolutely all of the details. This is especially important when responding to government or nonprofit RFPs. If you're going to respond, absolutely be thorough. Don't think that any little section is like, oh, that's a silly question. That's the same question that they asked 3 pages earlier. I'm just going to not answer it. No, answer all of them, because sometimes part of the evaluation process will be, imagine you have 100 proposals on your desk. You want any excuse to make that pile smaller, right? So there may actually be regulations that say every question must be answered, so you're automatically disqualified if you didn't answer a small question that seems insignificant. Some people may say, that wasn't really answered very thoroughly, see ya. And then you get put in the throwaway pile. Make sure that you're really being thorough, even if it seems like it's not making sense to you in the moment. Understand their terms and conditions. Understand, as I mentioned earlier, that sometimes when you're responding to an RFP, you are actually also agreeing to their contract in advance. Make sure that you know that and you get a copy of the contract and you read it. And finally, play by the rules. So understand what their procurements are and never, ever ask them to violate those, because they can't do it and they're not really going to appreciate being asked. So even though throughout I've said, well, selection criteria can be negotiable, and that's all true, but understand up front, how flexible is everybody? Like, do you have a very rigid process? Is this something that's regulated by the state? If they say yes, okay, then this is just how we're going to have to do this. Everyone has a boss, so knowing how to make that person shine will make you a very valuable partner to them. One of the things that you want to consider in your approach to working with clients is, sure, the project is the thing that you want to succeed. And sure, the organization is the thing that you want to succeed. But the person that hired you is really the person that you want to succeed, because they are going to speak about their experience with you glowingly or not glowingly, depending on how the project went. The project can succeed and the organizations can succeed, but the individual fails. That doesn't help you at all. So be mindful of who all your many clients and responsibilities really are. So where do we go from here? Please visit norfps.org. This is a session. This is not a session. This is a movement. The message I'd like to leave people on before we get into questions for a few minutes, if we stop responding to RFPs, if we stop engaging in this kind of behavior that isn't leading to good relationships and finding really good matches between clients and vendors, clients will stop writing them. Questions? Really? Mr. Eaton?
One of the things that you mentioned that I thought was interesting was that concept of turning an initial engagement with a client, the figuring stuff out process, into an actual unit of work, that they get something useful out of at the end, they, figuring out what the hell their problem is and what might be a good way to solve it. And you aren't just basically doing 3 weeks of spec work, trying to come up with a pitch to them on what you use to solve it. How successful has that actually been? Like, you've been able to do that at some times, and other times it just seems culturally incompatible, but it feels like the most promising direction.
So the question for the microphone, the question was, how successful have we actually been in trying to turn requirements gathering, facilitated workshop, discovery kind of work into the actual work down the line, right? Or are you saying just how successful is that deliverable period?
That deliverable period.
Great. We have been very successful in doing that. We do it kind of differently, though. We actually do 2 to 3 day on-site facilitated workshops where we guide people through what are your business goals. Let's not talk about this website thing you want to build. Let's talk about your business and your goals and who you serve and why you exist and what everybody is afraid of and what are some things that have worked well in the past. We understand their business. We include in this in the report for the workshop an outline of what they're trying to do as a business or as an organization or nonprofit or whatever. And then we talk about the website, because now we've created a frame that says this is what you do. Now you've decided you want this website. Let's talk about how that website achieves those goals. At that point, people are already thinking completely differently, because very few people we found approach a web project from the perspective of we are a business and this web project is going to facilitate our business. They often just say, hey, we need a blog, right? Or e-commerce is a thing, I've been told. And it gets so watered down by the time it's actually packaged as an RFP to please so many different stakeholders that it's not really clear why it's being built. We need to refresh our website. Okay, sure. But what do you do, and why do you think your website's going to help you? Just refreshing your website may not do anything. You may just spend a bunch of money. So then we have that conversation about the website, what the website needs to do, who they're serving, what they're trying to get out of it. Oftentimes, that's a service that we provide just standalone, and there's no expectation of putting together an RFP or anything. But we do that kind of facilitation for clients professionally, and then they go do it in-house, and we knew that all along. So we've actually been very successful in that kind of approach, but we also have very structured workshops that we've developed.
Chairman, is there a framework, or are you able to open source the methodology that we use to facilitate those workshops? We've done something similar to what you described, but it's very dependent on the client, where the potential client came from, the relationship, and oftentimes it's made up.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's a 2-hour facilitated discussion with 3 stakeholders. It would be really nice to see something that was open source that would kind of give a framework for that facilitated workshop.
Sure. So the question is, could we open source or reveal or make available the methods used in the workshop? We'd be happy to, of course. Now, what may surprise you is there really isn't a methodology. A lot of it is it's tailored to every single client. So what I would recommend doing, if you're really interested in this kind of approach, read a book called Gamestorming. Gamestorming is a book that talks about ways to interact with groups and to visualize goals and needs and audiences. It's essentially like game storming. It's all one word. Like games, yeah. That was the game motion, I guess. Game storming. Game storming. One word. Think brainstorming, but game storming, right? So you're using games to brainstorm. So there are all kinds of like fun, like post-it note activities and drawing things and ways just to like elicit thought and creative juices, right?
That's similar to a company that I think the company name was Play. Originally, I don't know, something Play was in the name, where they would go to companies and teach them how to concept ideas in the forms of games, within their organization, help them brainstorm.
There are actually a lot of organizations like that. Yes, yeah. So we follow similar things, and the reason why I can't give you an exact, well, first we do this, and this, is because you have to go in with more than you can actually do in the 2 or 3 days, because some stuff is going to work and some stuff is not, and you just drop it and you move on to the next thing, or you on the fly come up with something that's going to elicit a better interaction from the client. It becomes an art, in other words, because you're in a room, the client could be 2 people, it could be 10 people. You don't really know until you show up. They always tell you some number and the number's wrong. Or they've suddenly pulled in people, or people can't show up, or whatever it is. So it's always different. And different organizations and groups have very different dynamics, and there are certain activities that work, and there are certain activities that just fail completely. So you try something, and you build on that. It's sort of an iterative workshop approach. So there isn't really like a method, it's more like a set of practice things that you are constantly trying to improve. But I would love to, I can talk about the different games and things that we do at length. I'd be happy to later. Yes, sir?
How do you convince a client that they should pay for a facilitation workshop when they're just saying, we want a website, but we don't want to talk about what our objectives are in our business?
The question is, how do you convince a client who is not that interested in doing a workshop? they're not interested in the workshop and they really don't feel that there's any value, and then the flip side of that coin is you as a vendor can't actually deliver value to them or convince them of that value, then there's nothing you can do about that. They're going to have to engage in some kind of discovery, though, even if it's just a website that they're building, because you'll want to know, okay, what are the sections of the website, and what is it going to do, and how will people interact with it, and what are the use cases? And I mean, there's always a discovery phase, whether you call it a workshop or not, right? We just wrap the discovery phase into a workshop that has a really intense period of work that gets people thinking in new ways. You had a question?
Yeah, as a vendor, we love the idea of not responding to RFPs for the same reasons I heard you just talk about here. And I love that you ended with, if we stop responding, they'll eventually stop asking for it. Are you finding, or do you know, when that happens, it's always the good companies who are paying attention to stuff like this and decide not to. So it's the crappy vendors who are still going to respond to it. In those cases, are those issuers of the RFPs just going with these sub-quality vendors, or are they saying, no, all we're getting is garbage, we should figure out a better way to do this? Or do you have any idea?
I don't have a way to restate that question, so I'll just answer it. No, that's okay. That's okay. So I'll restate it in a way that I hope answers it, but also allows a little more insight into what I'm talking about. The fact is, RFPs are a fact of life, and it's going to require some major revolutionary change in our industry to eliminate RFPs. They're a holdover from people doing construction projects, right? It's just how people have thought business is supposed to be done for probably hundreds of years. If you watch Mad Men, you've seen that they talk about RFPs in Mad Men occasionally. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that the people who are responding to the RFPs, that the only people who are still issuing them are somehow like behind the times, and that the only people who are, I'm not saying you said this, but, and the people who respond to them are like the crappy vendors. I think that by doing this and by planting this seed of thought among everybody here, that there are other ways to do this. We can, in places, enact maybe evolutionary change like Zach Chandler did at Stanford. It's possible to do it in a university system, granted a private university system, but it's possible to do that. So if one person from one other IT department could learn from him about this new way of doing things, maybe some of those things can be introduced and success can be shown and the whole organization can build on that. And after years of doing it, it's clear that, oh, we've been trying it this way, we've done some A/B testing, we've done it this way, and we've done it that way, and this no RFPs way is yielding 20% more projects are on budget and there's higher satisfaction of the outcome, right? It's going to take time. Does that sort of address what you're getting at?
Yeah.
You had a question.
Well, I had one that was asked a second ago. I think I have another one. You had talked about the negative perceptions that go along with time and materials type billing, societal perspectives on attorneys or mechanics and so forth. In general, it seems like time and materials is something that people aren't used to purchasing things frequently with. They're used to saying this thing costs this much and it does exactly this, or it looks like this, or it feels like this and has these features. What advice do you have on educating people to the benefits of time and materials in general, and to educating them and improving our reputation or avoiding the negative connotations that might have gone with other industries that work in this way?
Sure. So the question is, how do we better convince clients of the benefits of time and materials billing, and how do we as vendors try to eliminate some of the negative stereotypes or concerns that clients have about time and materials? So there's going to be a panel at 3:45 in this room where we're going to talk about that a little bit. To briefly get into it, first of all, if you're going to do time and materials billing, for those who maybe don't know exactly what we're talking about, there are basically two ways to bill. You can do fixed bid, which says, I'm going to build you that website for $10,000, period. And however much money you're making in that $10,000 is up to you. Maybe your actual cost of doing the work is $5,000, so you have $5,000 in profit. Maybe it costs you $9,000 to build, so you're making $1,000 in profit. It's up to you as the vendor. That's how you do fixed bid. Time and materials is, I'm going to build you that website, and I'm going to bill you how much it costs to actually make it, according to hours and materials purchased. Time and materials is overall a more fair way to do it because the amount of work that you are being reimbursed or compensated rather. You are being compensated for the actual time that you're putting into the project. A client would much rather have a fixed bid because to them it's more fair. I told you I want this and I'm going to pay that. That's the end of the story, right? So there's this sort of like, there's a little bit of a conflict there. Time and materials, why is it better for the client? It's better for the client because I'm going to have to explain a whole bunch of things about project management and stuff to like get into that. They will have more control over what actually gets built. They're going to have a better relationship with the vendor because then the relationship will no longer be adversarial in that you as the client or you as the vendor are always going to say, that's not what you asked for, that's too much work, that's out of scope, we can't do that. But rather we have the relationship of, yeah, we can do that. That's a really interesting new idea that just popped into your head that we can integrate into this website that wasn't in the original scope of work at all. What will we not do in order to do that? So it creates a better conversation and a partnership around we're just here to build whatever it is you want. And you and I will work together to figure out how much time and therefore how much money you are going to be putting into that. It's the relationship that people typically have with lawyers, for example. You call up a lawyer, they read your contract, that's 2 hours. They give you advice on whatever, that's 15 minutes, right? They're on call to do whatever you need. To eliminate the negative stereotypes about time and materials, to alleviate clients' concerns, because nobody wants to have like a blank check kind of approach, right? You have to be really good at estimation. You have to be able to tell the client, yeah, that's going to take you 10 hours, and I'm very confident that it's going to be 10 hours, maybe 11, but we can definitely get it done for 11 for sure. That kind of confidence will make the client confident, and that not only that you are that confident about the estimate, but that you actually hit that estimate is really important. Coming in below is really good too, but you don't want to come in below so much that it's clear that you're just padding all your estimates, right? That means that your estimation's off. Like you want your estimation to be on target. Certainly not below the actual cost, but really not above it either. That's all the time I have. I'm going to hang out in the hallway for a little while here to answer any questions you might have. Check out newrfps.org. Thank you very much.